Thank you everyone for being here with us today for the Home Safety Workshop for professionals who support families. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute website and will be emailed to you in the coming days. This webinar will be very interactive, so we will remove the discussion pieces in the recording. So the breakout rooms and all that will not be included in there. My name is Robin Stewart. I am the Child Injury Prevention Program Coordinator with the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute. The Prevention Institute is a provincial nonprofit organization. Saskatchewan is located on treaty lands 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, and the traditional lands of the Métis. We acknowledge that our work is carried out and with people from these lands. We are committed to working towards reconciliation and strive to reaffirm our relationship with one another. Our organizational focus is to help all children thrive through primary prevention and the promotion of well-being. We aim to raise awareness, build capacity, and respond to emerging trends by providing training, information, and resources based on current best evidence. We believe that all children, regardless of ability, have the right to the best physical, social, and emotional health possible. We work in a variety of areas, including maternal and infant health, early childhood mental health, child traffic safety, and more. One focus of the Child Injury Prevention Program is to provide evidence-based information on topics relating to preventing life-altering injuries and deaths that is accessible to service providers working with children and families. Most injuries are predictable and preventable, yet injuries are the leading cause of hospitalizations and death for Canadian children and youth between the ages of 1 and 19 years. Here to facilitate today's workshop on home safety is Deanna Marler. Deanna is a professional human ecologist with a master's degree in public health. As a health promotion facilitator with Alberta Health Services, her role is to support community members and organizations in building healthy communities where people are safe from preventable injuries. Some of the health topics she covers include home safety, falls prevention, transportation safety, and suicide prevention. Thank you so much for being here today, Deanna. I have learned a lot from Deanna in past workshops, and I'm excited and grateful to have her spending the afternoon with us. While Deanna has adapted parts of her presentation specifically for a Saskatchewan audience, we do have participants joining us from all across Canada. The information will be broadly applicable to many Canadian communities. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Deanna.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robin. I'm also joined with my colleague Pascal, who's going to be helping to facilitate today, just to kind of help break things up so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. So Pascal's also a health promotion facilitator, and he works on our team in public health. And so thank you for that great introduction, Robin, because you kind of touched on a lot of the points that I usually say in my introduction as well. I just put a slide up here that has some ideas just for the chat box as we get started. And so I find that it can be helpful as we work through these types of workshops to get a feel for who exactly is in the room. So if you are comfortable, what I'm asking is if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat box just what organization you're from, what your role is with families, and if you have any specific kind of questions or takeaways that you want from today's session. So I'll give you just kind of a moment to do that, and then we can kind of jump into the content. So just kind of some housekeeping things I did want to mention before we get started. As Robin mentioned, this is going to be a fairly interactive session today. So we find that it best supports learning if we're able to really have open conversations around the topic, if there's lots of opportunities for engagement. So we will have polls throughout the session. We're also going to have opportunities to participate in the chat. And to provide comments. Another thing I want to mention as well is that Pascal and I are not the experts on this topic. What we are professionals who have kind of pulled together the research on best practice and put it into a resource But we acknowledge that the participants here today, everyone here today, has a level of knowledge and expertise in this area, whether you've had children of your own, whether you've been working with families. You will have wisdom on kind of how to approach the content. And so I do welcome you to share your wisdom with the group. I think that's a really important piece of our workshop today, is being able to engage in knowledge sharing. So I encourage you to do that in the chat. We will have a few discussion opportunities as well. So I encourage you to do that throughout the session today. And we're also going to have some breaks as well that we, if you need to get up and walk around, if you need to take some time for yourself, I encourage you to do that as well. Okay. So here is the sessions that we're going to be covering today. So we've kind of amalgamated 3 different sessions into our workshop today. So we're going to be talking about, for starters, breaking down childhood injury by age and stage. So in that initial phase of our workshop, we're going to be talking a lot about, what types of injuries are we seeing in young children, specifically within the home environment, and how do those injuries differ based on the age and development of the child. The reason why we're focusing on home-based injuries is because that is where we see a lot of our childhood injuries, because children spend the most time in the home environment. And we also know that the home environment is built for adults' comfort and use, and therefore children can be vulnerable in this environment in their formative years. After that, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and talk a bit about harm reduction, specifically with a focus on injury prevention. And so in this part, we're going to be talking a bit about what exactly we mean by harm reduction in the context of injury prevention, why we would use an approach like this, and what steps that may include. And then finally, we'll be looking at our final session, which is engaging families in home safety. So that one's going to be looking at, specific activities. How can we adapt our messaging to be accessible for families? How can we make it interesting for them? And so that'll finish us off for the session. And then, of course, we'll have some opportunities to practice some of the skills throughout. And here's just a quick look at our outline there. So we will have some breaks throughout as well. Okay. So following the workshop today, we are hopeful that there are some kind of learning outcomes to meet. The first thing is that following this, we'll encourage people throughout, but we're hopeful that everyone recognizes that preventing serious childhood injury is a priority in many different, types of work. We're also going to be covering, again, some of those leading contributors to childhood injury in the home. And we're hoping that following this session, you'll also be able to distinguish between the injury and safety needs of children at different ages and stages. So those are our learning outcomes for our first bit of our workshop today. Okay. So I want to get started with a poll. And basically, my question for you is, how important is preventing childhood injury in your work or role? So there's a few ways to think about this. You can think about, how much time do you spend on topics related to child safety in your work? Does your organization provide training around child safety topics? Do you provide programming that positively impacts child safety? And so take a second and just answer the poll, and this will kind of give us a bit of an idea as well on, how prominent this topic is in our different workspaces. It looks like most people said very important, so that's good to see. And then we have about 6 people said important and about 3 moderately important. So of course there's going to be a mixture, and that's going to depend on what your role is and kind of what the priorities are within your organization. And so hopefully today throughout, we'll also provide just some strategies for managing injury, even if that's not necessarily the focus of the organization or role that you're within. Okay. So what exactly do I mean when I say we want to prevent childhood injury? And what is kind of the purpose of our workshop today? I find that it can be helpful if you imagine a pyramid. And so at the bottom of the pyramid are minor injuries. So typically these injuries don't leave a lasting impact on the child or their family. Often they heal in a short period of time and can often be addressed with basic first aid. And so this is kind of the section of our pyramid that's the widest because most childhood injuries are going to fall into this category. So you can think of, falling off of a bike and scraping your knee, or, breaking a baby toe, or something that's a little bit more minor. As we move up the pyramid, though, as the injuries become less common, they do start to become a little bit more serious and can have a lasting impact on the child and their family, whether that's through disability, other forms of trauma. So in worst case scenario, these situations can also result in death. So it's these serious injuries that we're really concerned about. And this is what we're going to be focusing on for our session today. And so the question is why? Why are we kind of selecting our focus to be on those serious injuries? Well, don't we want to prevent all injuries? That's kind of the question. But the reality is, of course, nobody ever wants to see a child get hurt. And we want to do everything we can to keep them safe. But we do have to acknowledge that there is a difference between the types and severities of injury out there. So, a small fall while playing on an age-appropriate playground or while learning to walk or ride a bike, those are a normal part of living a healthy, active life. So these also provide, these injuries, they provide opportunities to be active and learn new skill, and that often outweighs the risk. On the other hand, consuming a button battery or falling from a 2-story window offers no benefit to the child and can lead to significant health consequences like disability or death. And because these injuries are not, a normal part of day-to-day life, they are preventable. And so a big part of creating a healthy environment for children is being able to balance safety with opportunities to play and learn new skills. We don't want to bubble wrap children. What we want to do is recognize dangerous situations and take actions to make them reasonably safe so that we can avoid life-changing serious injury. So one of the ways we hope to accomplish this goal is by providing support to those who work within the community and have relationships already built with families of young children. And so based on the research, home safety counseling and support from a trusted professional can actually significantly reduce the likelihood of injuries in families. And we recognize that professionals, have a huge impact and have a huge role in supporting this. And so what a big part of our workshop today is about giving you the tools that you need to help support families in staying safe and staying healthy. Okay, so I want to do a bit of reflection right now. And I want to use the annotate function to do this. And so if you've never used that, you should see on your screen kind of a green bar that says you are viewing Deanna Marler's screen. Next to that, it should say view options, and there'll be a little drop-down menu. If you click on that, there should be an option to annotate. And so if you select annotate, it'll pop up like a bar, and you should be able to click on text. And so what I'm hoping that we can do is answer the question, what role do you see yourself playing when it comes to preventing childhood injuries? And so if you click on the text box, you can click directly on my screen here, and you can actually type out responses. And of course, if this is causing challenges for you, you're also welcome to use the chat as well. Okay, so we have education, parent education, resources, absolutely. Important information, reassurance, they're on the right track. So bringing attention to child safety risks in the home through respectful education, role model, hands-on skills. Absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot of different roles that you may have. So it could be distributing resources when needed, advocating for support for families. It could be helping families troubleshoot. And maybe if, you don't have those opportunities, it could even be something like encouraging colleagues to, take this type of training, or providing resources to professionals that you work with who may benefit. So there are quite a range of different things that you can do. And I'm hoping that we can kind of explore some of those as we work through the workshop today. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Just going to clear drawings here. And I'm going to pass it on to Pascal now, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the specific types of injuries that we see.
Thanks, Deanna. Over the next few slides, we're going to discuss some of the most common types of home-based injuries seen in childhood. Now, we won't be able to discuss them all because there's so many, and we are kind of on time restraint today, but we will provide some additional resources to fill in the gaps, so including a summary document which reviews the types of injury and key prevention strategies. I believe that Deanna just put that in the chat. Thanks, Deanna. Now we have another poll. So what do you think is the leading cause of injury for children? Is it burns, fire, poisoning, drowning, falls, suffocation, choking, or struck by an object or person? There we go. All right. Looks like the majority of you said falls, and that's correct. So so this graph that we have here that we're just going to put up here is shows a count of childhood hospitalizations across Saskatchewan from 2004 to 2013, categorized by age and injury mechanism. Now, what this graph does tell us what this graph tells us, though, are the leading causes of injury in the home and the frequency of these injuries across the different age groups. So looking at this graph, feel free to come off mute or even use the chat. And what do you notice? And does anything surprise you?
I thought drowning would be a little bit higher in other categories, not just the 1 to 4.
Why do you think that, Michelle?
I live in Saskatchewan, and I find a lot of people don't know how to swim.
And there's a lot of lakes, I guess, from what I hear, in Saskatchewan as well.
Yes.
I think for me, the falls is very I don't know, children are often falling, right? So it's really surprising that it would be falls that are the, account for most of the injuries. I mean, especially at, 1 to 4 years old, children are often falling, learning to walk, tripping over their own feet, things like that. So I find it really surprising.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Christian.
I just wanted to say I thought suffocation for children under a year would be higher, just as children of that age tend to mouth objects a lot more.
Like put objects in their mouth and.
Yeah, but I'm surprised to see that falling actually contributed more than suffocation did for that age range.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, so as mentioned, falls are the #1 injury for all ages, and in that 1 to 4 years, that's where there's the greatest risk, and that's kind of based on their characteristics, right? So the developmental stage and that curiosity, kind of exploring, those are some of the things that can result in those falls. So while most falls in children don't cause serious injuries, falls are still the leading cause of injury for children. So between 2004 and 2013, 2,045 children under the age of 10 were hospitalized due to falls in Saskatchewan. And young children are still learning coordination and balance. They love to explore and climb, and they're unable to clearly understand danger. So that cognitive ability, that underdeveloped frontal cortex is a big part of it as well. So which puts them at a higher risk of injury. So where do falls most commonly happen? Well, in infants and older toddlers, typically from furniture such as beds, couches, change tables, etc., and also from steps and stairs. And in older toddlers in preschool, typically from furniture or from tripping or stumbling while walking, running, or crawling. And then with school-age children, falls typically happen during play, and such as falling from play equipment, because they love to explore their surroundings, and there's all these cool new apparatuses and playgrounds now. So that kind of bit of risk taking and just not having the ability to determine that danger is a big reason why they're falling from play equipment. Also, so young children also have the highest risk of poisoning because they're naturally curious. So that's the next slide. And between 2004 and 2013, 686 Saskatchewan children over the age of 10 were hospitalized due to unintentional poisoning. Over 80% of these children between 1 and 4 years of age. So one thing to keep in mind is that although these are Saskatchewan statistics, they're pretty much consistent across the country. So we're going to see similar types of injuries. The numbers might vary, but in general, they'll be in alignment with other provinces in terms of like the leading types of injuries. So we have another poll here. What do you think is the top cause of poisoning in young children? So we have button batteries, lotions, laundry detergent, Advil and Tylenol, vitamin D, prescription medications, hand sanitizer, toothpaste, plants, and pesticides. Right. So it was a close one here between Advil and Tylenol and prescription medications. So according to PADIS, within Alberta, most calls concerning young children involve the following poisons. And so like I mentioned earlier, like although we keep mentioning like either Alberta, Saskatchewan, like the data is pretty consistent across the board. But the number one is like ibuprofen and pediatric Tylenol, vitamin D, and then adult Tylenol, melatonin, essential oils, fluoride toothpastes, hand sanitizers, cream, lotion, makeup. So yeah, lots of things here, even things that we carry around in our backpacks, bags, purses, those sort of things. Does this list surprise you at all? Is there anything on here that you wouldn't have expected? And is there anything that you think is missing from the list in your experience? And once again, feel free to pop that in the chat, or you can come off mute if you like.
Hi, I just found out recently that kids can be poisoned by Vicks. So
Thanks,
that
Shana.
was, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? Given that we're coming up on that cold season, actually, a lot of people are starting to put kids back in school now, so people are getting sick, and I'm sure a lot of parents are maybe reaching for that Vicks and putting it on their throat, their child's throat, or in their tummies or the back. And so, yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Shana.
More or less like the consumption, like if they were to like grab it and probably swallow it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few others. Cannabis, gummies, chocolates, cookies. Yeah.
The lotion actually surprised me. So they must be ingesting it then if it's causing them to be poisoned. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Stephanie says, expected household chemicals and cleaners to be on here. Actually, so I think we were just talking about this before we started our presentation, that some of like the stronger household cleaners aren't included on this list because parents are more mindful or aware of the dangers of these stronger household cleaners. So they're not typically going to be included on this list. Okay, so one of the reasons that medications are the most common cause of poisoning is because they resemble candy or other foods and can confuse children. So let's see if you can identify the pain reliever in this picture. So this is always a fun activity. Where is the pain reliever? On the right or on the left? And there's a little poll that goes along with that. Okay, this is pretty overwhelming. Yeah, you are correct. The answer is actually on the right, and they both do look very similar. And so this is why it's important to never refer to medication as candy, and using medications out of view of children, and always store medications locked up tight and out of sight to avoid poisoning. And that goes with a lot of the other products that we mentioned earlier. So, all right. Poisons, like medications, can also hide in plain sight. Here we have an average purse. And I guess this, just thinking about some of the things that all of you carry around as well, like I mentioned, it could be either a backpack or a bag or fanny pack or all these different things to carry other things in, I guess. So what poisonous items could be in here? So let us know in the chat. What do you think could be in a purse or your backpack or even some other carrying things that we have? Medication, hand sanitizer, and meds. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, lotions, hand sanitizer, perfume, deodorant. Absolutely. Insulin. Yeah, Advil. Ibuprofen, cough medicine. Yeah, absolutely. Chapsticks, allergy meds, makeup. Listerine strips. Coins. That's a bit of a choking hazard for sure. All right. So mini sanitizers. Thanks, Leanna. So poisonous substances are not just in our medicine cupboards or under the sink. Many of these poisons are in locations accessible to children, as in a purse or bag. This is why it's important to know where the poisons are and always place purses and bags that contain poisons out of reach of children.
I'll just mention one thing too.
Yeah.
Because when I saw this, I was like, why are there car keys on there? Button batteries. So the batteries that are inside the keys. And so I just noticed kind of in the comments, some people were, had some interesting comments there, and things like, lotion and stuff like that. Of course, every reaction to ingesting something is going to be a little bit different. So some things are more toxic than others. But basically what we tend to see is that a lot of the calls that we get are for poisons that are more accessible to people because, as Pascal mentioned, like your prescription medications, you may be more cautious with. Kids are not likely to be around, pesticides and stuff like that because we're thoughtful about that, and we often will keep it locked up. But we don't always realize that there's these other things that are in plain sight that are accessible to children. And so that's why we tend to see these substances higher on the list for poisoning and more common. It's just because we don't always think about what's accessible to our children. And so I noticed there are some comments in that. So that's great that kind of people picked up on that.
Yeah, and Danica made a good point. Like you're saying about plain ibuprofen, just because it's easily accessible, it's over the counter, is you wouldn't typically think that is toxic or dangerous to children, but it absolutely, it very much is. So that's a good point. Okay, we are into another exciting poll today. So all children's products sold in Canada must meet specific safety regulation. True or false? This is always a fun question. It's kind of cool seeing the results come in. It's kind of like a little race between true and false, and it goes up and goes down, goes up, goes down. But the answer is actually false. So most Canadians believe that if a product is available for sale, it is safe or has been tested for safety. But this isn't always the case, especially with products available for sale online or handmade products. And certain safety products like cribs, baby gates, playpens, and car seats are regulated. So although many other children's products are not, including bunk beds, bath seats, sleep hammocks, and trampolines. So toys do have some regulations. And for instance, they cannot have any sharp edges or points and must label if there are small pieces that are not suitable for children under a certain age. And I think we've probably all seen that on some, like the boxes, they'll say like choking hazard. And so however, toys still pose a danger to children. So this is why it's important to encourage caregivers to think critically about the products they use with children. So just because something is available online or recommended through social media doesn't mean it's safe. And Health Canada provides information on recalls and safety alerts when an incident is reported. And families and professionals can access this information and report incidents on the Health Canada website. And Deanna's just going to pop a link into your chat for that. So, okay. So children under 3 years of age are at the highest risk of breathing emergencies because their airway is less developed. They often explore things with their mouths, and they're learning how to safely eat. And some of these dangers can include choking or aspiration, which is the inhalation or ingestion of a food or object that causes an obstruction in the respiratory tract. Second one is suffocation, which is when an external object blocks the nose and the mouth. Strangulation is when the neck is constricted, which interferes with breathing, of course. And then foreign body is when an object is stuck in a natural opening of the body, such as beads in a nose or Lego. I think it's probably a common one as well, too. Now, some of these common hazards in the home that lead to breathing emergencies in foreign bodies include access to small toys or objects that are small enough to fit through a toilet paper roll, eating hard, sticky, round, and inhalable foods like raw carrots or uncut grapes, unsafe sleep environments like when an infant sleeps on their stomach or sleeps with soft bedding, and both of these situations can lead to suffocation, and access to string cords or anything that can wrap around the neck, like blind cords. So what hazards have you seen? And once again, post ideas in the chat or come off mute if you like. Yeah, cords, yeah, connect to the TV and gaming systems, for sure. The cord from blinds, yeah. You know what, I think over the last few years, we've heard a lot about recalls for certain blinds because of the cord that's not, like, it's either too long or can, create that strangulation in children. So parents, small objects in purses, bags, not being mindful of older kids' toys that are choking hazards, absolutely. Hot dog pieces not cut up. Oh my goodness, I don't know why. This actually reminds me of, I think it was in the movie Field of Dreams, I think, where there was like with Kevin Costner, and I don't know, was it? Anyways, there was like a child choking on hot dog pieces. I just made me think of that. Little toys with detachable heads and arms, absolutely. TVs not mounted to the wall, clothing iron, grapes, yeah, absolutely. Grapes can be pretty large as well, and bed by the window, beets. A lot of good responses here. Thanks, everybody. So children can choke on small items in the house, and to understand if an item is safe for a young child to play with, take an empty toilet paper roll and drop the toy through. So that's a neat little trick. And if the toy fits through the roll easily, it's not safe. So this activity or tool may be helpful to share with your caregivers or families. And it's a practical way for them to see if the size of a toy is safe or not. And that way they don't have to ask someone, they just look it up online and they'll know firsthand using the tube test. And here's a little video just showing you. All right. Yeah, so this is a great little test that you can do with your families and with your own children and find out if something is a choking risk. Just, we all have these little toilet paper rolls and they're easily accessible, and just put them through. All right, we have another exciting poll. So a child's skin burns 4 times more quickly and deeply than adults at the same temperature. True or false? So this one is true, and children are at higher risk for burns because, as we discussed, they're curious, they're less aware of safety risks, and their skin is thinner than an adult's skin. What does that mean? If a child and adult were exposed to the same, what that means is that if the child were exposed to the same hot surface or substances, a child's skin would be more susceptible to a serious burn. So between 2004 and 2013, 191 children under the age of 10 were hospitalized due to fire and burn-related injuries. And some of those common contributors included hot tap water, hot foods, beverages like hot coffee, hot appliances, stoves, of course, and open flames. We also see burns from electrical equipment and unprotected outlets, as well as chemical burns from things like corrosive cleaners and other chemicals like button batteries, as Deanna mentioned earlier, and fertilizers. And now for other childhood injuries, there's also drownings. This is actually, when I first came across the statistic, I was pretty shocked to hear this, that a child can drown in less than 2.5 centimeters of water. So as a result, anywhere that water collects can pose a serious risk to a young child. So this includes like the obvious locations, like bathtubs and outdoor pools. It also includes toilets, mop buckets, coolers, drainage, ditches, rain barrels, and other hazards that collect and hold water. Also being struck by an object or struck by a person. This is the second leading cause of childhood injury in the home. And this general category, which includes things like colliding with somebody or a piece of furniture, like a coffee table getting hit by an object, like a falling box, or getting pinned under furniture, like a TV or dresser, which is why we always recommend families anchor furniture to the wall and safety-proof their home. Also, cuts or piercing injuries can occur from other mechanisms like falls or being struck by an object. And it can also happen as a result of contact with sharp items, so like yard tools, farm equipment, kitchen appliances, or cutlery. We prevent these injuries by teaching safe handling skills and locking up dangerous equipment that may pose a hazard to children. Okay, I'm just going to pass this on to Deanna now, and she'll be chatting a bit about safety considerations by age and stage.
So now that was a really quick overview. we do have a summary sheet. And so I put it in the chat earlier, but we can always send that out following this workshop as well, because I know that was kind of a really quick overview. But I want to thank everyone who's been kind of putting some of their ideas and expertise into the chat as well. I do want to just take some time to recognize that, of course, you know, when we saw that graph, there were different levels for each age group. We noticed that there was a lot of injuries for that young age group, for that, you know, 1 to 4 years old. And then it'll change just based on, you know, what activities children are doing, where they are developmentally, cognitively. The Saskatchewan Prevention Institute actually has a really great document that goes over injury prevention through ages and stages. And then we also have one for AHS as well. And so Pascal has just put those into the chat. If you're curious, kind of getting more of an in-depth look at where children are, what their milestones are, and how that relates to safety considerations. But I just wanted to go over some kind of notable things before we jump into that. So, you know, when we talk about injury risk, it's going to vary based on an individual's physical size and their abilities. And so if you think about an infant, for example, versus a toddler, infants, you know, you're not seeing really injuries from like stumbling or tripping over things. We don't see quite as many like poisoning injuries in that age group, because they're just developmentally not at that level, right? They're not able to necessarily explore, move around the house on their own. But we do tend to see serious injuries from falls for younger children when compared to, you know, maybe an older child or an adult, because they're so small. And so when you think about an infant, you know, they carry a lot of weight in their head. So if they were to fall off of a change table or off of a bed or a piece of furniture that really for an adult isn't that high off the ground, it can still be really serious for an infant or for your young child, because they're a lot smaller, that distance is a lot greater. And so that's kind of one of the things that we mean when we talk about, you know, the differences in injury risk. Another thing you can also think about is that like an Advil or a few Advil for an adult probably doesn't have a huge impact on us, but for an infant that can be a fatal dose, because they are, again, a lot smaller. Same things with, you know, if I was to spill a cup of hot coffee, it may only cover my hand or wrist, but it could cover the entire body of an infant. And so these are just things we want to think about when we talk about injuries. And, you know, I like to think about this too in having conversations with families and explaining why certain things that aren't that hazardous for an adult may be so serious for a young child. Some other things to think about as well are, you know, learning and cognition. So often, you know, we see with younger children, like toddlers and preschool age, we see a lot higher rates of injuries in a lot of the categories. And a big part of that is because where they are cognitively. So they're into exploration, they are very curious, they are learning about the environment around them, but they don't necessarily have the ability to detect danger and to make decisions to keep themselves safe. And so, you know, we may provide really simple rules for young children to help protect them, but at the end of the day, these children don't necessarily have the ability to make those decisions, to recognize hazards and do things to protect themselves. And so that's why we tend to see, you know, so many more of those injuries from things like poisoning. You know, an older child probably knows not to put a dishwasher tab, for example, in their mouth, but for a young child, they don't understand that. And so we're going to see a difference in those injury rates. And then finally, thinking about the social and emotional stage too. So this tends to come out, you know, when we get older children, they start to enter that phase where risky play is very popular, and developmentally, you know, it's important for them, for their learning, for their growth. And so, you know, wanting to climb trees and to do other risky behaviors, you know, learning to use a knife, stuff like that, that's where they are. And so we do kind of have to alter our approach a little bit The same thing with when you're working with, older children, when they start to become teenagers, there's that, interest in risky behavior. And so all of these three components we have to take into consideration when we're thinking about the injury risk for a child. And so to kind of work out a bit of an example here, I want to introduce you to a family. This is the Cardinal family, and they have 4 children. They have Lily, who is 3 months old, June, who's 2, Sam, who's 5, and Jay, who's 12. Now, this represents a really common situation that if you work with families, you probably see a lot, which is families that have children at different developmental stages with different injury risks, and that can make it really challenging. For example, older children who like to play with Lego, those toys, those things in the house can be really hazardous for a younger sibling. And so it is kind of good to be able to understand how, with families, they're going to have those different developmental stages. And so what are kind of key considerations for each age? And so, as I mentioned, we had posted in the chat right now, there's 2 documents that you can kind of use to give you some additional information on those safety considerations. What we are going to do, though, is provide a bit of an activity here. And so we are going to do some breakout rooms. And what we want to do is basically get you a chance to work through a scenario with a few other professionals and kind of look at what are some of the safety considerations. So Pascal's posted a link to a Jamboard in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind just clicking that and opening it up, what you'll see is there is a page for each child. And if you've never used Jamboard before, it's pretty simple functionality. So what you're going to do is you can see I kind of have my page here. You can add sticky notes to the different slides. And basically what I want to do is I want to kind of look at what are some of those developmental activities. So for example, with Lily, we noticed that she has, pretty limited mobility because she's an infant. And so just thinking about these developmental activities, how might these activities impact Lily's safety? So how does, having, maybe being able to roll from the tummy to back, sucking and mouthing objects, how does that impact her safety? And what are things that we have to take into consideration? And so what we'll do is it has the breakout room that you would be in listed on the slides. So 1 will be Lily, of course 2 will be June, and it just kind of works its way up as we go through the slides. So thanks for going through that activity. I apologize if anyone had any technology challenges. I know that's always it's always the risk when we use different software. I'm wondering if any groups, maybe we can have a couple groups share back, which child they had and kind of what some of the discussion was around with safety considerations. So maybe I can ask for two volunteers.
Yeah, I can go. So I don't know what group number we were, but we had Sam. He was the 5-year-old, and kind of we got a late discussion because we were all doing something, didn't hear the instructions. But anyways, so we kind of had a late go at it. But what we came up with was kind of just giving Sam some responsibilities, and while he's playing with Lego, to ensure that to watch the play, so that if it is small Legos, he doesn't put them in his mouth. The other discussion was maybe letting him play with the bigger Legos and maybe not the so small of the Legos, but if there is small Legos, just to kind of monitor his play with the Lego while teaching him, like, don't put this in your mouth. This is very dangerous if you do. We also talked about giving him a little bit of responsibility of cleaning up after he was done with them, and so that other, if they're siblings, they don't get a hold of them and put them in their mouth. Yeah, so just kind of starting that responsibility progress at that time as well too. And yeah, ensuring that he cleans up so other people also don't step on them, because they really hurt when you do. So that's what we kind of.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Misty. Was there one other group that wanted to share kind of what you discussed in your room? Cheyenne.
Hi, so we talked about Jay. Jay is 12 years old, and a lot of the developmental activities Jay is going through all contribute to Jay being a bit, we might consider them a bit safer because they have, developed control over large and small muscles, for example, and they have improved decision-making skills. But we also recognize that these could lead to some risks. So they might be injured in a sporting accident, specifically a concussion, or might be injured with a hobby that uses sharp objects like woodworking. They may also feel the need or the ability to make their own decisions without asking the parents. And parents might relax their guidance and boundaries, which might be great, but it could also lead to a false sense of independence. And so that can lead to kind of accidents because parents aren't watching the oldest child quite as closely, perhaps. And then as well, being a bit older, they might be injured due to peer pressures from friends, or they might consume misinformation from friends, specifically things sent to them via social media. Lots of misinformation out there, and kids are very active on social media. But as well, yeah, Jay might do really well, and with those improved decision-making skills and thinking independently, they might make really great decisions too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cheyenne. Yeah, those are really great insights. And I like that you kind of thought too about, just the full environment. So like social media and technology and just kind of all the different environments that this child might occupy. Okay. So just kind of one thing I want to mention is that, we spend a lot of time talking about where children are developmentally, but of course, children grow and they change and they learn new things. And so it's really important to kind of anticipate where they are heading developmentally and stay one step ahead of them. And so a good example is, we have child safety locks, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before, where children eventually learn how to remove them. And with enough time and practice, they can learn how to remove other safety barriers too. And so we do kind of have to stay one step ahead of them. And so knowing not only the stage that your child is in or their child is in, but also where they're heading is also important so that we can put those safeguards in place before they have a potential injury. And so that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind. But with that brings us to the end of our first chunk of the workshop today. And so just some key takeaways. Preventing serious childhood injury is a priority. So we saw those hospitalization rates earlier. We saw kind of the most common injuries that we see in young children. And the leading causes that we saw were things like falls was number one, and that's for all age groups, not just for young children. But then we also noticed some things that relating to poisoning prevention, breathing emergencies such as suffocation or strangulation, burns, and then of course drowning, being struck by things, and cutting and piercing injuries. And then finally, we talked about how injury risk will change based on the child's age and developmental stage. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is harm reduction for home-based injuries. So I go through this, just one thing to kind of keep in mind is that we've chosen to use a harm reduction lens because we believe that it can be an effective strategy to help promote health equity, and also acknowledge that every family is unique and has varying abilities and desires to follow standardized safety recommendations. So that's why we've kind of used this approach versus maybe some others that we can use when talking about families. Our learning outcomes for this section are, we're hoping that by the end of this, participants will be able to define harm reduction and identify examples as it relates to childhood injury prevention. We're also hoping that you have the ability to understand the impact that family context and the determinants of health have on childhood injury risk. And then, of course, looking at being able to support families and problem solve together with them. So we do have an approach that we're going to be working through as well. Okay, so I want to use, just take a moment to talk a bit about harm reduction itself and what does harm reduction mean for you. And so I want to use the annotate function again for this. So just a reminder, if you click on the top bar where it says you are viewing Deanna Marler's screen, you can select view options and next to it, and there should be a drop-down menu. And if you click text, then you can select, you can click directly on my screen and write some text. Or if that's not working, you can also use the chat function. But my question is just, when you hear the term harm reduction, what does that mean to you? That could be words that come to mind. It could be, phrases, approaches, ideas. Basically, what comes to mind when you hear the term harm reduction? Using both best practice and deep understanding of the context to reduce harm as much as possible. Yeah, that's a good good comment. So again, it's what comes to mind? What do you think of when you hear harm reduction? So reducing the probability of harm through situational understanding. Yeah, reducing risk when engaging in injury-causing behavior. Absolutely. And give us another minute for this. Strategies or measures that you can use to reduce your risk of getting hurt or injured. Doing more than nothing, doing better than before. New knowledge was shared, reducing risk, even if it means things aren't perfect. I love that. That's a great way of putting it. Working towards positive change and working without judgment, protecting themselves and others. Yes, that's a really great comment.
And there's a few more that came into the chat as well, Deanna. We get prevention before accidents happen and having strategies set in place as well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to jump ahead now. So, yeah, that pretty much hits the nail on the head, all of those comments. So, we do have some principles that I just wanted to reflect on. So that do underlie harm reduction and kind of impact the way that we use it. So the first thing is looking at pragmatism. So basically what that means is that we're realistic and practical about the situation. So for example, that would mean that recognizing that, behavior may continue even if the person knows that it's harmful. It could also mean, recognizing that even behaviors that are deemed to be harmful may also offer other benefits to a family. So a good example would be something like co-sleeping, which, when we look at the research, there is an increased risk of sudden infant death syndrome, falls and suffocation while co-sleeping. However, on this, on the reverse side, we also recognize that a lot of families choose to co-sleep because it offers benefits as well, such as, being close to the child, having opportunities to bond with the child. A lot of parents will say that it helps with breastfeeding as well. And so, approaching that kind of situation, we're trying to be realistic and really have a holistic understanding of what's going on. Another principle to consider is autonomy. So basically, that means that we respect the person's right to make choices for their own lives and their own families without judgment. So as we had mentioned, families, we're not the experts. And so families are going to be the experts of their own children and when working with their own children. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. We may have kind of some additional information that we can help to support them with, but ultimately the decision is theirs on, what approaches they make or what decisions they choose when, raising their children. Dignity and compassion. So of course, in order to have that relationship and that positive engagement with families, we do need to consider, what the situation's like. We have to treat them with dignity, with compassion. There needs to be respect and that non-judgmental nature in place too. And so that's really important for properly using the harm reduction approach. And then finally, the last thing I'll mention is a focus on harms. And so basically what that means is that our focus is on reducing the negative effects associated with a behavior rather than ending the behavior itself. And so as an example, if we have a parent that is using substances in the home, it's not about, trying to get them to stop using the substance. It's about how can we, make decisions? How can we do things differently to ensure that the child is safe if a parent continues to use substances? So those are just kind of some considerations. And one thing that I like that people notice too is, often when we talk about harm reduction, we think of substance use, we think of safe injection sites. But in reality, harm reduction, we do that every single day. Anytime you wear your seatbelts when in the car, wear a helmet when on your bike, or use sunscreen when you go outdoors, those are all forms of harm reduction. And so it doesn't have to be something related to substance use. It's anytime we take action to help minimize the risk of harm. So when we think about harm reduction for childhood injuries, and someone actually pointed this out on the annotate function, which I like, but basically if we think about it like a spectrum, so on one side we have really high risk situations. So I don't know how well you can see this picture, but hopefully we don't have anyone on a tightrope above a bunch of sharks like in our picture here, but we have really high risk situations. And then on the reverse side, we have more of our low risk situations where it's highly unlikely anyone would get hurt. That's kind of when we're bubble wrapping our child, so to speak. And most families are going to fall somewhere in the middle. If not all families will fall somewhere on the spectrum in between high risk and low risk. And so what our goal is understanding where they are, why they're there, and helping to move them along the continuum to those lower risk situations. And in this kind of perspective, even small movements are considered a success. And it's important to recognize that, not everyone is going to be able to make it to that green side. And that's not necessarily our goal either. What we want is to take steps to reduce the chance that serious injuries will happen, and that'll look different for every family. And so it's important to also, celebrate those small successes and those small wins. So what's an example of harm reduction with injury prevention in mind? So let's say that, you have a caregiver that uses cannabis edibles in the home. We can help to reduce the risk of poisoning to a child by, using a lockbox to store any cannabis products. And so we acknowledge that, it may still continue to be in the home, but let's make sure that it's stored safely to reduce that risk of harm. This could also mean, if a caregiver is planning on using cannabis while the child is home, maybe we're having another adult present who is able to supervise the child more closely. And so it's about coming up with those strategies to, again, reduce the risk of an injury from taking place. Another example could be, alternative sleeping spaces. So in this image, we have a caregiver who has chosen to use a basket on the floor as a sleep surface instead of having the infant sleep on the couch with them. So the reason why we don't want infants sleeping on the couch is because we know that increases the risk of SIDS and other injuries like falls and suffocation. And so this situation could happen if you have a caregiver who is couch surfing. Maybe they're visiting someone and they don't have access to an approved crib, cradle, or bassinet or other sleep surface. And so, we acknowledge that that's the reality. And so how can we lower that risk? And so in this situation, they've used, an empty basket placed on the floor as a safer alternative to sleeping on the couch. Okay, so we do have a poll here, so I'm just going to launch this. And my question is, how often do you use harm reduction with the families that you serve? And of course, this will depend on what your role is, what your organizational policies are. But part of kind of being a reflective professional is understanding, the approaches that you use. So it looks like we have a mixture. So some people who say they always use it, but 41% say very often. Some people use it sometimes, and then one person who rarely uses it. Okay. And of course, again, this will vary depending on just, again, what your role is and what the opportunities are. And we also have to recognize that a harm reduction approach is not always going to be the appropriate thing in certain situations. So a question that I have for you is, what are or what might be some of the barriers or challenges to using harm reduction with families? So why might you choose not to use it? Why might it be a bit of a challenge to use? And so again, you can use the annotate function to answer this question, or you're free to use the chat as well if you prefer. So differences. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. Not having the knowledge that something is harmful in the first place, nor how to reduce that harm. Yeah, absolutely. If you're not really sure how to address it, that could be a barrier. A lack of trust. Absolutely. If the risky behavior is illegal, it may require intervention. So yeah, that can make it really challenging too, especially, if, it's a behavior that is illegal or it could cause serious harm. Do we want to even use a harm reduction approach? Caregiver insecurity, a lack of trust. Yeah, and that's why having that relationship built with families when going to use this approach is so important as well. A language barrier. Finances, not having the ability to purchase things that can increase safety. Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard this before, if you're, particularly with like homeless populations, or if someone's couch surfing, they don't always have the ability to put those measures into place. A lack of awareness. Yeah, home visitor insecurity. Yeah, so maybe too, as a professional, are you comfortable using that approach? That's something to keep in mind as well. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm just going to clear this and we're going to jump ahead here.
We also had a couple people mention cultural differences as well. So that's another big one as well. So
yeah, we'll touch a little bit on that. I'm glad that one got noticed because we're going to mention that, or Pascal's going to talk a bit about that. Landlords not allowing families to install screw and baby gates. Yeah, that's a really good one. Sometimes your living environment, like you're not able to put like certain barriers up and you can't modify the environment. So then what do you do? So something I just want to note is that we do acknowledge that there are some barriers when it comes to using this type of approach. And it's not always going to be the appropriate approach. So you should always kind of refer to your organizational guidelines and also your professional judgment too. So a good example would be, if there is a serious and imminent risk of harm to a child, sometimes you can't use harm reduction. Sometimes there needs to be intervention. And so you do have to, again, use your professional judgment, because we are working with children who are kind of that vulnerable population. And then sometimes there's resistance, either from the family or from the organization too. And so those are just things to be aware of when kind of going about this, and to keep in mind, because it will impact the outcomes. Okay.
Deanna. So one of the reasons we may use a harm reduction approach is because all families will live in different circumstances, and these circumstances can impact their ability and desire to follow best practice recommendations for child safety. And so understanding the context is crucial if you want to provide realistic strategies to improve home safety. So some of those determinants of health that impact injury risk include gender, age, culture, income, education, access to healthcare, and neighborhood and social support. So it's important to acknowledge determinants of health, because injuries disproportionately affect the most vulnerable children in society. And that includes those with low socioeconomic status and those who live in lower income neighborhoods. Now, on the flip side, determinants like having access to social support and health resources, such as home safety counseling, can help reduce the risk of injury and promote health equity. So based on your experience, what are some of the determinants of health that may impact the families that you serve, both negatively and positively? So at this point, you're more than welcome to just, if you want to unmute yourself, if you're comfortable. If not, you're always welcome to just pop that in the chat as well. I'm just going to maybe throw those out there again. So some of them, they were gender, age, culture, income, education, access to healthcare, and neighborhood and social support are some of the determinants of health. So living in cramped small spaces with multiple children due to not being able to afford a bigger place. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a lot of risk for injuries when you're in a confined space, or if the space is very limited, there's a lot of maybe children around. Absolutely. History of colonial violence perpetrated through health authorities. A good point, Shan. Thank you for that. Okay, we can move on. So one of the biggest challenges we often face is starting conversations about home safety with families. So it can sometimes feel awkward and uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be that way. So we've developed a resource that can be used as a guide for speaking with families about home safety, which includes a few strategies that our team uses to make these conversations a little bit easier. So one of the strategies is using stories or statistics and facts to start a conversation. And this could be either a new statistic that you just learned, a news story, a personal story, or facts about child development that may be helpful to the caregiver. Also, using open-ended questions to promote sharing. So for example, instead of asking, do you know how to create a safe space? Maybe instead ask, how do you create a safe space for your child? Or safe sleep space, like a tongue twister. A safe sleep space for your child. Also, ensuring caregiver wisdom is valued and heard. So we want to make sure that caregivers feel like an equal partner in the conversation. And we can accomplish this by using active listening, validating their experiences, and using open-ended questions to learn more. Also, keeping it positive by emphasizing strengths. So focus on the caregiver and family strengths, not just the challenges. And an example of that might be talking about how much the caregiver loves their child, or acknowledging all the hard work that they've done to keep their child safe. And also we have using neutral statements to address misinformation. So sometimes caregivers will share statements or facts that are not evidence-based. And when this happens, show that they're heard and that you value their wisdom, and then focus on providing a neutral explanation of the current best practice. And a good example of that might be if a caregiver says that infants should sleep on their stomach, you can explain that every year we learn about our child's safety. And while this is used to be the recommendation, we now know that the back is safest because it reduces the risk of suffocation and aspiration. So we're just wondering if any of you have employed any other strategies that you find work well when you're speaking with families. So yeah, feel free to drop that in the chat as well. And Deanna just posted another link in the chat for home safety conversation strategies.
And like
So with Kids First program, sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
you go ahead.
So with the Kids First program, we have a home safety checklist that we do with all our families within the first 6 months that they enter into the program. And it talks about everything from like the living room, the bathroom, the bedroom, everything that you could possibly think of. And then from there, if there's like, say, if the cords, for instance, if there's cords hanging from the blinds, we ask them how might they eliminate that safety risk. And then we'll check in with them like a week later or something to ensure that what is not right in the home safety checklist that they have done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Instead of saying like, you know, you should do this, or like how might you deal with that? So yeah, that's great that you guys have access to that. All right, so there's a few additional examples for starting conversation, and one of them might be, I just learned that falls are the #1 way that children get hurt. I remember my son falling down the stairs when he was young. It was pretty scary. How have you been dealing with falls in the house? And once again, I love that approach about how have you been dealing, instead of like kind of shaming them and saying like, you know, why have you done this, or why didn't you put this gate up, for example. Or so it's more open-ended question, and it's more like I said, it's less shaming. And another one might be, at this age, toddlers are very curious about the house. What kind of things has she been exploring? And this question helps us identify opportunities to talk about safety proofing the home.
One thing I like too about the first one is that it kind of reduces the vulnerability, because you admit that you've also made that mistake. Because I mean, we've all had those experiences. And so the one thing I like is, you know, if you can reduce the stigma behind, you know, childhood injury, if there's a way to say, you know, like to show that it's common, or to say, you know, I've seen this before, this has happened to me before, like that really helps. I know families feel a little bit less stigmatized, and that helps to kind of reduce that judgment as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Deanna. And it just indicates that we're all human and we've all made mistakes. Yeah, good point. Thanks, Deanna.
Cheyenne has her hand up.
Oh, yes, Cheyenne.
Yeah, thanks. So with both these statements, one of the things I noticed is that both statements respect the knowledge of the caregiver, kind of like what you were talking about in your conversation starters. So how have you been dealing with falls in the house? And so that makes them feel like, you know, what they've been doing is important. But I think as well, it also provides you as the professional or practitioner to also learn from parents, because they might have some clever way that they've been preventing injuries. And so it also it helps them understand that like you both are experts in different ways, and it just creates that equality and opens that conversation.
Really good point. Absolutely, Cheyenne. Thanks for that comment. So somebody else have a question? Okay. So we have a little scenario here, and which just popped up on the screen. So May has just joined your parenting group after having her second child, Willow, who is now 4 years old. Oh, sorry, I'll continue. During your group discussion, May shares some important teachings on child rearing, which she learned from her mother. One teaching centers around co-sleeping, which allows her to bond with the baby and easily breastfeed. So May and her partner, Willow, sleep in the middle of the bed where she can stay warm and cozy under the blankets. And sometimes their 2-year-old son, Sam, will also sleep with the family. So based on those conversation and strategies that we discussed a few slides ago, how might you start a conversation about child safety with May? And once again, feel free to unmute if you're comfortable with that, or just post your responses in the chat. And so, the question is just, how might you start a conversation with May? So here's a few tips that we have as well to help you. And this was one of our earlier slides as well, is just maybe using some stories or statistics and facts and open-ended questions and keeping it positive and using neutral statements as well. James was saying, so when you're sleeping, are the blankets over you and the child? Absolutely. Thanks, James. Willa, I like that. I've noticed you sleep with the kids. I used to do that. I was wondering how that might be going for you. Absolutely. Once again, using those open-ended questions, and not like using a non-judgmental approach as well. Christian, you say, May, you may say that they must feel nice to be close to your child. However, there are risks to sleeping like that, and there are also ways to feel close to your child. I work with moms from different cultures that also sleep with their baby. Can I share a few facts I just learned with you about co-sleeping? Absolutely. Fantastic responses, everybody. Cheyenne, thanks for sharing. Acknowledge the benefits of co-sleeping and then discuss some possible risks and ask how she reduces them. Excellent. Keep it strength-based. Yeah, everybody, these are fantastic responses. So a couple, you already mentioned some of these, but it sounds like you really love your children and have thought a lot about where Willow should sleep. Have you been keeping Willow safe? We're in the bed. Some of you pretty much touched on this. So I've been reading a lot about safe sleep recently, and I learned that infants are at risk of suffocation during sleep, which is pretty scary. How have you been managing the risk? So you're definitely on track. Everybody's on track with this. So great job, everybody. All right, I'm going to pass this on to Deanna to chat a bit about the problem solving together approach or resource.
Thank you. So we have a resource here. I'm just going to put it in the chat. Okay. It's really basic, and I imagine many of you are already kind of following this approach. But I find that sometimes it's just nice to have like an actual something laid out in case, you're in a situation where, what do I do next, or how do I bring this up? And so we have something called the problem solving together approach. And so one of the things I just want to emphasize is that it's together. And that's because we really need to be working alongside families. We don't want to be saying, this is what you need to do and this is how to solve this, because, as we've probably experienced in our own lives, often that creates a bit of distance between you and the caregiver. They may shut down, and it makes them, it creates a situation where, we remove that opportunity for them to make their own decisions. And so just kind of thinking about that situation that we talked about with May, I'm just wondering, I'll go back to the scenario here. So what exactly is the injury risk? So it's always good to kind of start with thinking about that. And that's the first step in our approach, is really understanding what the risk is, because, as we kind of mentioned earlier in the start of our workshop today, sometimes the benefits outweigh the risk. And so we do have to understand that, is it something that's going to cause serious injury? Or is it just something that we're not used to? And so these are conversations worth having. But if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, what is our concern here with this situation? Yeah, Shane, suffocation, crushing, yeah, SIDS, overheating. So we have some concerns around safe sleep. So, you know, if a caregiver was to roll over on top of the child, that could be a risk. It sounds like there's a lot of warm blankets that they're wrapping around the child. So overheating and suffocation, falling off of the bed. Yeah, because we talked about how, you know, an infant, you know, an adult bed poses a huge fall risk for them. Okay. So yeah, you guys got that. So once you understand kind of what the injury is, you know, we've decided that, yeah, this seems like it could be serious. So it's worth kind of proceeding. The next thing we want to really think about is what's the family context? So why is this situation happening? You know, what situation are they living within that's maybe allowing this to happen? What are strengths that we see that we can work off of? So just going back to the scenario here, does anyone notice anything about the family context that might be helpful to know, or might tell us more about this family? Yes, so she mentioned that these teachings are passed down from her mother. So maybe this is something that has been done culturally. Maybe it's something that's just been seen as important to the family. And so we do want to be cautious when we are having the conversation about this. You know, if it's something that is important to this family, we don't want to come in and say, you know, that's wrong, you can't do that. And so that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. Any other observations from our scenario about family context? Breastfeeding means that only mother can feed baby in the night. Yeah, so I mean, just realistically, you know, thinking about the situation, I know a lot of caregivers will choose to sleep with baby because it makes it easier to breastfeed the child, and based on kind of what resources they have available, or if, you know, they have challenges with, pumping or bottle feeding. Another one too is that this is her second child, so she likely has some expertise around you know, raising a young child before she's gone through this once already. Yeah, so we knows that, you know, they're maybe a really close family because they have all four of them share, you know, sleeping together in a bed. Maybe they only have, you know, one space to sleep. So I mean, obviously we have to extrapolate a lot because this is you know, you only have a little bit of information, but these are kind of questions to think about as we're working with this family. Another thing is that she's in a parenting group, so that's interesting to know too, because, you know, that means that there's potential opportunities to have these conversations with other parents as well and receive support from other parents. Okay. So, oh, I'm not sure if someone was going to say something. Sorry, I thought I heard a voice. So the next thing to kind of think about is now we want to start to brainstorm. You know, we've gotten the lay of the land, we know what's going on. Now we want to work with that family to start brainstorming some ideas to reduce the risk. So when we look at safe sleep, there are some recommendations and best practice policies. And so one big thing is keeping, you know, pillows and adult bedding away from the child. So we know that for children, it's safest to sleep in an empty sleep surface with nothing around them that could, you know, block the airway or cause, you know, other safety issues. And so that could be kind of one potential strategy. We know that we want to avoid sleeping with pets or other children. So generally, you know, the fewer the people in the bed, the safer it is, because there's lower risk that someone's going to, again, you know, entrap the child. We want to ensure that they can't get, you know, entrapped between the bed and the mattress, or between the mattress and the bed frame. If there's, guardrails, is that safe? So there's, things to look out in the bed as well. And then of course, if a child is sleeping with a caregiver that uses sleep medications, who has been drinking or is intoxicated, or who smokes, there are some increased risks there as well. And so these are all kind of potential avenues to start brainstorming some ways to reduce the risk. And so for our situation, we'll say that, May has decided that what would work best is to kind of remove those excess blankets, maybe use a sleep sack, maybe have Sam sleep elsewhere. Or, I think someone mentioned this, maybe have Sam sleep with the dad. So these are potential options. The next thing we want to consider are available resources. So what is around that can help May implement this, or can help her learn more? So, we know that she's a part of a parenting group, so that could be a potential opportunity for, information for talking through the challenge with other parents. We know as well that, there could be some information. I have AHS information from our presentation, but of course, whichever provincial healthcare authority you're with, often will have best practice recommendations. Parachute, our national injury prevention organization, also has tips and strategies and resources to provide. Is there a place where she can get low-cost sleep equipment? So of course, there's a lot of different potential opportunities for resources to consider. And then of course, then it's about implementing that process, and then finally kind of assessing how it went. And so the importance of that is because we recognize that we've laid this out as kind of an iterative process, or as a linear process, but it is really iterative. So you might find that, okay, that didn't work, or it didn't work for the family. And so maybe we have to go back to brainstorming. And so this will take time, and we always want to be supporting families throughout and checking in on them as well. Okay. So that brings us to the conclusion of this section. So I just want to go through some key takeaways before we take our next break. And so harm reduction can support families in leading safe and healthy lives regardless of their circumstances. And that's a really important piece, because that means that, it's not just for families that are lower income, or, for families that have low education, for example. This is an approach that can work for anyone, because everyone is going to live in unique circumstances. Family context and the determinants of health will impact the risk of childhood injury, of course, too. So that's why it's so important to understand how families are living, because that's going to impact the type of strategies that we suggest. We would never suggest to a low-income family or a family that's living in a rental property, to buy expensive equipment or to make home modifications, because that just wouldn't be realistic. And then we can support families in addressing potentially hazardous situations by problem solving together. So by using that approach that we just reviewed. So our final session, or final component of our workshop today that we're going to talk about, is engaging families in home safety. So a big part of what our role is when we're working with families is not just giving them information, but also supporting capacity so that families can feel empowered to, reduce childhood injuries. So we know that child safety information can be really complicated and overwhelming, particularly if you're a new caregiver. And so our goal is to provide some tangible activities that you can use with families to learn more about home safety and child safety together. And so these resources are going to aim to be simple and inexpensive and engaging. So our learning outcomes for this part of our session is that We're hoping that when you leave here, you believe that building capacities in families on child safety is necessary and important. In addition, we hope you leave with a better understanding of how to make safety messaging simple and engaging. And then finally, that you can, when you leave here, you'll be able to identify at least 3 different strategies for educating families on child safety. Okay, so question for you. And again, you can feel free to use the annotate function, or you can use the chat if you prefer. But my question is, how do we make safety messages easy to remember and act on? So you can think the same, for messaging about health and safety and child development. What do we do to make these messages easy to remember and act on for families? So Michelle said, keep it simple. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's already complicated enough, so we don't have to overcomplicate things, and often we do. So keeping it really simple. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Yeah, use the same or similar message from multiple sources. Yeah, so that's a really great strategy too if you're concerned about, the reliability of information, or ensuring that it's accurate, especially if, parents are going online with questions. How do they know that it's accurate? So yeah, using multiple sources as professionals and encouraging families to do that as well. Use visuals. Yeah. Yeah, so imagery, everyone learns a little differently too. So I know for some people, just hearing things is not effective. They want to see something, they want to go through it on their own too. Make it specific to a family need. Yes, so targeting it. Things that are just blanket messages for everyone often don't resonate for people. And one thing that we always say on our team is when you make something for everyone, you make it for no one. So that's just kind of something to consider. Work with families to make the messages easily integratable. Yeah, so how can we use this realistically in your life, in your home? Teach through storytelling. I love that one. Everyone loves stories. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay. So I had a few things, but I think we already covered them. Keeping it simple is kind of a really important thing to consider. So that means that you want to minimize the number of things to remember. And if there's a lot of, important stuff that you have to talk about, then breaking it up into small, manageable pieces. And we always say too, really, once you get more than 3 messages in one sitting, people are going to forget. So try to limit it to, 3 important things, and then it's a lot easier for people to remember. And that goes for, tips, guidelines, anything that people are likely to forget. And as well, leaving out complicated details and focus on what the caregiver really needs to know. If it's something that is really complicated that they want to learn about, then using analogies, using stories, trying to break it down, examples, or is really helpful for people as well, for keeping it simple. Another thing that I noticed people mention is making it actionable and practical. So, we want to stay away from really abstract concepts. We don't want to make sure that it's something people can act on and they can actually do. And so, if I was to just say, oh, you want to be careful with burns in your house, what does that really mean? That's not helpful information. Instead, I might say, if we're worried about burns from hot water, I can help you turn your hot water heater down, or I would consider, turning down your hot water heater. So that's something that's practical and that someone can do. And then the final thing is making it relevant. So again, tailoring it to the family, making sure it's based on their needs. And so I'm not going to provide messaging for something that they don't even have. We're not going to talk about, safety around stairs and baby gates if they don't have stairs in their home. So it just kind of depends on, again, the family situation and making it relevant to them. And so, an example of this might be, again, if we're talking about burns, I might say, one thing that I just think about is we want to turn your hot water heater down to 49 degrees Celsius. And the way that I remember this is Lotto 649. I think of the lottery. Or, if you're into football, there's also the San Francisco 49ers too. So finding some sort of memory hack can be really helpful as well. Then Aaron wrote, provide short messages to stick on fridge or other places where it can be easily feasible. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, I'm just going to clear this there. There we go. One thing to kind of keep in mind too is that it's easier to remember things when it's interesting and engaging. So we like to use stories and games and activities. And so as an example, let's say you want to, talk to a family about button batteries. Maybe you've noticed that that's a concern in the home. So you might want them to understand the dangers and explain, the impact it has on child's health. So I could either, show them this page that I took from our website here and talk about it. And maybe I might do that, but also to make it memorable, you could do something like, this experiment. So basically this is an image of a button battery that's been placed inside a piece of ham, and then the ham has been folded over top of it. And this is I find this quite striking and frightening, but it shows you kind of what happens to the ham after 1 hour and 2 hours of being folded inside this piece of, or have this button battery inside. And so if a button battery does that to a piece of ham, you can only imagine what it would do to a child's throat and esophagus if they were to swallow it. And so I always like to think of this kind of visual as helping to remember and really see the impact. And it just makes it a little bit more interesting as well. Okay. I'm going to pass it on to Pascal. I think I took over his section.
It's quite all right, Deanna. So throughout our workshop today, we've included some engagement activities. I know we covered a lot of that material so far, but activities that can be used with families to build capacity around home safety. Now, here's a question. Can you identify any of the engagement activities that we've spoken about so far? There's a few of them, and I know, like I said, we've gone through a lot of stuff today, so it's okay if you can't remember them, but we will pop them up on the screen here. So one of them that we talked about earlier was the tube test. Seeing if any toys, objects, anything can fit through the toilet paper roll to see if that might pose a choking risk. And then we also chatted about the medicine versus the candy, right? Being able to distinguish between the two, and also making sure that you don't ever refer to medication as candy as well. Because children are always listening to the language that we use. And if they associate our medication with candy, then that could be problematic for sure. So we also spoke about the poison purse and all the different objects that can be found in there that are that can pose a poison risk. So just making sure that we keep these objects away from children, and that we are aware of what we keep in our bags, and yeah, of course, making sure that our children are not getting access to these objects in our backpacks or bags and purses as well. And of course, we chatted about as well, the true or false questions that we had, and all the facts and myths. So a lot of ways and strategies and activities that we have here that you can use with the families that you work with, or even for yourselves as well. So Deanna just popped another resource in here, so with different activities and resources that you can use. So there's a whole bunch of great ideas in there as well that feel free to go through that when you have time. And so videos are another great way to engage families in learning about home safety, and are videos for all ages. We've also created another resource that it lists of some suggestions for credible videos that teach about safety and explain how injuries happen, which is important, and also provide stories for caregivers. And somebody mentioned that earlier, using stories. So, and I'm not sure if how many of you are familiar with the blue character. Is this an actual video, Deanna? Can we actually play this one? Oh, here
Why
we go.
do you think your mommy or daddy are always telling
whole
you,
childhood
don't put
flashed.
that in your mouth? Let's find out.
Don't you put it in your mouth. Don't you put it in your mouth. Don't you stuff it in your face. Don't stuff it in your face. Though it might look good to eat. Though it might look good to eat. And it might look good to taste. And it might look good to taste. You could get sick. Ick. Real quick. Ick. Real sick. Real ick. Don't you put it in your mouth. Till you ask someone you love. That's right, sis. If it's okay to eat. If it's okay to eat. Like a muffin or a beet.
Like a muffin or a beet.
If you don't know just what it is. Remember, boys and girls. Don't put it in your mouth. Yeah.
Always ask someone you love before you put anything in your mouth.
Oh my God, I absolutely love this PSA. And I'm not sure if it's from the 80s or 90s, but I distinctly remember this from my childhood. It's deeply ingrained in my memories. And so every time I hear this video, it's like hopping in a time machine back to like whatever, 1980 something. So yeah, Danica, right? Like that was fantastic. And I don't know, actually, we don't have cable, but I don't know how many of these public service announcements they have for children, or if they still make these. Like, I don't know, does anybody know if they still like have these PSAs on television for children about like safety and poison and all of these things? I'm just kind of curious, because like I said, we're on the streaming thing of Netflix and all that stuff, so we don't have access to.
Yeah, fortunately, you can look these up on YouTube if you'd like to use them.
Yeah, so anyway, that was fantastic. So many local libraries also have tons of books on child safety, and this is your personal favorite, Deanna? How do dinosaurs stay safe? It says my personal favorite.
It's a good one. Oh yes, I put it.
How do dinosaurs stay safe?
Yeah,
So
one thing I'll note is that I put a link in the chat to a resource that has some books. Now, we're actually based out of Edmonton, so it's looking at Edmonton libraries. However, a lot of these books will be accessible in libraries across the country. So if you take a look at it, it does have, I know the libraries aren't local, but it does have some ideas for different books that you could pull as well.
Do you have anything else to add about this book, Deanna? How do dinosaurs stay safe?
It's a good one. It's good for just starting conversations too, because it has a lot of just general, ideas, and kids love dinosaurs, so they'll be open to reading it. And you can even use these books with parents as well, as kind of a conversation starter. And I mean, who doesn't love having a story read to them? So I always like books as a potential strategy for talking about safety.
So to simplify home safety, make it actionable, and make it relevant to families, we like to use a traffic light approach for home safety. So on one side, you have simple, more passive approaches to safety. And on the reverse side, you have active approaches, which are more hands-on and require more effort and control. Now, with this approach, we always start with passive, so the green approaches, and because they're a lot easier to implement. And I'm just popping a link in there as well. So how to use this approach? So the first thing we want to do is to get low to the ground, because it allows us to see things from a child's perspective. So Boring Kitchen is like an amusement park to a child with lots of fun stuff to touch, climb, eat, grab, yeah, all these fun things. So moving around the home and looking for any hazards that may entice a child. And this depends on their age and personality. So some of the things that you might be looking for is like what looks climbable, edible, fun to play with, bright and colorful. You know that children are drawn to bright colored objects. And a lot of companies have used this in their advantage to market their products, such as cereal, different types of cereals. And but you've just found your hazards. So basically, so finally you can use the traffic light approach to address the hazards you've found. And Deanna is actually taking us on a tour of her kitchen and trying so we can see all of these hazards that Deanna has in her home. So removal of hazards is a passive strategy because once it's done, no further action is required. So once you remove something, you don't need to worry about it. So for example, if I'm really worried about bleach, I might remove the bleach from my home and instead use a non-toxic substance for cleaning. And for this step, looking for hazardous items that the family doesn't need or use in daily life. And this will vary depending on the family context and their beliefs. So it's crucial that caregivers are identifying the hazards to be removed. And some of those examples of common hazards might include like old medications, a poisonous plant, as we saw in Deanna's kitchen, balloons, damaged and recalled items like baby walkers or broken toys, and those sorts of things. So let's go back to our kitchen, or to Deanna's kitchen, I guess. Let's take a look and see if you can identify something that we can remove to reduce the risk of injury. Sorry, to share, we're going to use the stamp function, and we're quite familiar now with the annotate feature. So if you go to the Deanna Marler's screen, green and to the right, and view options and annotate, there's a little stamp there, and then you can just choose whatever stamp you want, and then on the screen, just click on some of the items. There you go. I'm starting to see people click on some of the hazards that you see in Deanna's kitchen there. Things that we should probably be removing or moving, moving or removing. A lot of people pointing, yep, medications have been pointed out, the poisonous plant, things to grab, the knife in the drying rack, open drawers, magnets on the fridge, yeah, the towels. Everybody's getting everything. This is great. The towels on the oven that you can just pull open the oven, all the drawers as well that aren't locked. Yeah, few people got the knife block as well on the counter, the toaster. All these things can be plugged in. Absolutely fantastic job, everybody. I think we got everything, right, Deanna? Yeah, everyone's got they got them all. This is great. So now we're going to see what happens if you have a hazard, but you can't remove it. So you can't remove the stove or stairs or important medications from the homes. And this is where we use barriers. So barrier is anything that separates the child from the hazard or danger. And that includes things such as doors, baby gates, cabinet locks, safety straps as well on change tables, bumpers on table corners, window guards as well, anchors for heavy furniture, which we mentioned earlier. And even no-cost strategies like placing a piece of furniture in front of an electrical plug. And also for older children, a barrier could also include clear safety rules, right? So using, once again, simple, concise language that they understand and articulating the risks associated with that. So barriers fall somewhere in the middle of passive and active because we need to make sure they're correctly installed and used. And we need to watch the child to be sure they cannot open the barriers. So for example, a cupboard lock only works if we close it correctly and the child cannot open it. So we're going to go back to Deanna's kitchen again, using the stamp function now. Place a stamp on any locations where we could add a barrier to reduce the risk of injury. Let's see those stamps, people. And once again, we're going to be using that annotate feature again. So under view options, annotate, and all right, here we go. Here comes some stamps. Yeah. I think you're all really having fun with this feature. Got check marks and X's and little arrows, all kinds of things in here. I think you're all just having a little bit too much fun, which is fine, which is great. So yeah, it looks like a lot of you are identifying a lot of the places in the kitchen where we can be installing some of these barriers. Like we got the medications there, we can put those in a lockbox. Of course, there's a lot of check marks around all the cupboards and the drawers where we can be installing some child locks to those, and even on the oven and the fridge, sorry, and also putting the plant out of reach. I see there's a few check marks there, so we can be moving out of the way. Yep, there's also some check marks around the knives. The knives could be placed in a drawer with a lock on it. I think there's our electrical outlet, maybe some plugins there. Put those little blockers, plug-in things, whatever they're called. Yeah, what are those things called? The plug blockers or the outlet blockers.
I feel like that's what I'm going to call them now.
Plug blockers. Yeah, great job, everybody. And we could also add a gate to the entrance of the kitchen as well, just to make sure that children aren't having fun exploring all of these potential dangers. So, and of course, I mean, some kitchens aren't configured so you can actually put a baby gate, especially those kitchens that are open spaces. So in that case, we would just use all those barriers that we just mentioned. So sometimes we can't remove a hazard, and sometimes we can't add a barrier either. So we must use an active approach to protection, which involves supervising the child closely. So this step is active because it relies on the caregiver being attentive and alert and actively keeping the child safe. So of course, with young children, we always want to be supervising them. However, supervising them closely means that our eyes are on them at all times and within arm's reach, and we are consistently redirecting them from hazards. And a good example when this approach is needed is anytime an infant or toddler is in the bathtub, because we know that drowning can happen in seconds. Other times when this step is important could be in public or if the family is at someone else's home, which is not safety proofed. So this can probably happen quite a lot. And so in those situations, you know, we might find ourselves watching our children more than we are engaging with the adults because their home isn't safety proof. So we're just basically following them along and saying, don't do this, or don't, oh, watch out for that, or acting as a barrier, getting in front of them, maybe. I don't know. So many things we could do. All right, we're going back to the kitchen one more time. And this time we're going to use the chat to answer. So tell me when might we need to supervise children closely while in the kitchen? So looking at all the hazards and risks and dangers that we have in this kitchen, when would we need to be watching them a little extra closely? Yeah, when you're cooking, absolutely. Making meals, absolutely. Cleaning, yeah. Absolutely, Danica, having cleaning supplies out for sure. Cleaning and cooking. Putting groceries away, absolutely. Yeah, that's good. We're distracted putting the groceries away, and they might be curious about what's happening in the kitchen. So, yeah, all great responses. And yeah, I think we pretty much covered it. So great job organizing. Yeah, for sure. Whenever we're distracted doing something, whether cooking, cleaning, putting groceries away, and yeah, organizing. So, I mean, it might even be helpful to, if there's another parent or guardian in the house, to kind of keep an eye on them if you know that you're going to be momentarily distracted. Is another good strategy as well. So caregivers may want to also consider creating a safe spot in the home. So this is any spot where all hazards have been removed and where the child will be safe while the caregiver is occupied. Elsewhere with something like cleaning up a broken glass or answering the door. And safe spot could be a crib for infants, and playpen, extra saucers, safety-proof playroom, etc. So it's basically anywhere where there's like basically zero risk of them getting injured. So we have a few takeaways from this, and the first one is keep it simple and engage. Simple and engaging activities can help families better understand and remember safety messaging and empower them to make positive improvements in the home. Also, child safety messaging should be simple, and we've heard this quite a few times, and a lot of you have mentioned this in the chat. Keeping the messaging simple and also actionable and relevant as well to the family. There's many different education strategies available to support families in learning about child safety. All right. I'm going to pass this on to Deanna now.
So we've thrown a lot of information at you throughout the last few hours. And so what we want to finish off with today is to give you an opportunity to practice going through some of these processes, using some of these approaches. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do the breakout rooms again. And we're going to give you an opportunity to test out the problem-solving approach, to test out, this traffic light approach, if you think that would be valuable with some families. And so we've developed 2 different scenarios, and we're going to post the instructions and the scenario into the chat right now. So if you can click on that and kind of open up the file. And so what we're kind of hoping is you can use any of the resources provided today to help support this family. So anything that we've talked about throughout the last few hours that you think might be helpful. Okay, thanks, Diane. So that can be anything from, again, the problem-solving approach, but basically take some time to think through that. And I mean, if you have things that work for you as well as a professional that you've been using with families, you can use that also. I'm wondering if there are 2 groups that might be interested in sharing at all about what they discussed and kind of how they worked with their family.
Are you gonna talk? We can share a little bit about, we did scenario 1. Were you able to hear? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So just talking to Mom about what her options are for storage of her joints and her edibles, just in preparation for the fact that baby can't move now, but it won't be long until he is moving around. And so just to get into a good habit of protecting him from accessing those things. We talked about helping Mom ensure that baby's sleep environment is safe, because it says he's napping in the bed. And at 3 months, he's getting close to the age where he might be able to roll. So just helping Mom figure out, how can we make sure baby's safe? And problem solving that with her. Maybe providing some information on the impact of baby breathing in cannabis. So that and the poisonous risks of baby consuming the edibles if he was to get a hold of them at anything. He's at that point where he can grab things and maybe get things to his mouth. So providing some information and talking about where it might be safer, like if she's smoking joints, not to be smoking where baby's going to be inhaling them. So then helping her to problem solve, where could you be? And then if baby's napping and she's problem solved how to make sure he's napping safely, to make sure that she's not consuming too much that then she can't function, because she said she almost dropped baby in the shower. So just helping her figure out what's the timing on the impact of what she's consuming and when it might be safer. And maybe giving her some strategies on stress reduction so that she has some other ways to cope with her stress. And also maybe engaging her in a parenting program where, you know, there's childcare and like some of the stressors associated with that. But then there's also generalized information like safety for baby and stuff. And it wouldn't feel like it's targeted. It's just general information about keeping baby safe and understanding ages and stages. And then her coping strategies would be improved just by that, but she'd also have that social environment where she's got peers that are experiencing similar things and can share advice and knowledge.
Thank you so much, Trisha. That was a lot of really great insights. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I noticed a couple people put some reflections in the chat as well on how to support the families. That's wonderful. Was there anyone else that wanted to share before we move on?
I'll share.
Oh.
So we're at scenario 2, and it was Pat and Mila, our caregivers for 3-year-old, for 20-month-old, 4-year-old, and 7-year-old. They took over responsibilities a year ago and have been working hard to get their grandchildren a good life. They have little money and do their best to keep costs down, which often means they spend most of their time at home. So when you meet them for the first time, you notice that the apartment is very small and cluttered. Pat mentions that the child's aunt also lives in a home, which leaves very space for each person, and the children all share a room where they spend most of their time playing. When you look in the bedroom, you notice lots of toys like marbles, Legos, and other small pieces on the floor. So for the first question, some of the answer replies were like, I noticed it's pretty cluttered in here. How is this going for you? Maybe we can incorporate this into a module or individual family plan. And then someone said, over the weekend, I've discovered an activity at my own home to help family, or there's a family or harm reduction plan. Problem solves. They said, what can we see is unsafe for 20-month-old? And have a plan, like incorporate with safety, incorporate with the safety and harm, a harm reduction plan. Incorporating activities for a domino effect for all ages of the household. And then activities, we said there's I Spy, or just getting at the crawling around child's level, or else a race to save space. Just creating activities like that. Yeah, I just thought I'd share.
Thank you. That's good. The I Spy one. Kids love that game. That's perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Jana.
Yeah.
Okay. So just kind of to conclude for today, so we touched on 3 different kind of areas, and we discussed kind of injury risks in the home and identified opportunities to improve safety. We talked about using harm reduction to support families living in a variety of situations. And we talked about educating families on child safety strategies that are engaging and simple. So just to kind of finish us off, I just want to do one final debrief. And so you're free to just kind of reflect on this on your own, or if you'd like to unmute or put it in the chat, you're welcome as well. But my question for you is, what is one thing from this workshop today that will impact your practice going forward? So that could be something that you learned today from the content. It could be, you know, an idea from another participant during your discussions. Really anything that you think you could use to kind of impact your practice going forward. And again, you're free to unmute or put that in the chat, or, you know, if you prefer, you can also just reflect on it. Conversation starters and engagement strategies. Awesome. Learning how to focus on the positives, even when it's a situation you would normally want to express alarm at. Approaching the situation with strategies so you don't lose that connection with the family by getting them defensive. Absolutely, yeah. Household safety versus harm reduction safety. Wonderful. Problem solving together. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for kind of taking some time to think about that. I just want to let you know that we do have a survey, and we also have some additional resources that we're going to be sending out too. So Pascal has put some links into the chat, but I believe we're also going to be sending them out by email as well. And so if you have any feedback, we always welcome that. It helps us kind of improve our sessions for future audiences and helps us ensure we are meeting the needs of professionals working in the field. Yeah, and that is our conclusion. So I'm just wondering, before we finish off, does anyone have any questions at all, or any comments or expertise that they want to share? Okay. Well, if not, then I guess we are finished for today. I'll probably stay on just for a few minutes after, just in case any questions come up. But I want to thank everyone for taking the time to learn a bit more about home safety today. You know, I recognize that it was a long afternoon. There's a lot that we talked about, but I really appreciate you taking the time and spending that with us and providing all of your wonderful insights as well. So I hope that you all have a lovely evening. Yes, take care.
I also just want to say thank you to both of you, Deanna and Pascal. Thank you so much for being here. This was really great. We really appreciate it, and just reiterate thank you to everyone who came, and you're so engaged and lots of great discussions. That was fantastic. And there will be a survey from the Prevention Institute that pops up when you close this window, but I will send both surveys as well as the recording and additional resources out in a follow-up email within the next few days.